Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Physiology of Endurance Running podcast. Nearly forgot what the title was then, what we were called. Mine. Oh dear, it's been a day. Right, I'm Dan Nash and I'm joined by my co-host Owain Zarelli. Owain, how are you doing today?
Not bad, yeah.
Yeah,
Friday afternoon.
Friday afternoon. Yeah, I'm feeling Friday afternoon. I'm struggling a bit, hence my stumbling already. And today we're going to talk about actually how you should pace your next marathon. So uh a couple of months ago, or June, I've just looked now, I put out a thread basically saying the last 6 marathons I've even or negative splitted it. Why is that important? Why might that be optimal? And actually, how do I practically go about it? And with marathon season coming up, we thought it'd be a good time to dig into that. Well, what I put out on Twitter into a bit more detail, and yeah, hopefully help you guys execute well in your next marathon and get the most out of that training you've done. Because there's nothing worse than training gone great, and then on a race day you just get it a little bit wrong, and it goes awfully, and you feel like you've wasted all that training, all that fitness. I mean, I've been there. Owen, have you been there? You've had
No, I've only done 2 marathons, so
you've done, I seem to remember some stupid guy did 40 miles around the track, didn't he? And that went pretty badly.
the wheels fell off then.
Yeah, 40 miles around the track. Yeah, you deserve that for just starting that race. But, yeah. So cool. Yeah, we're gonna dig into a bit of detail around that, and actually hopefully nice one with applied things you can take away, and actually hopefully be directly helpful for you rather than just be interesting. Although hopefully it'll be interesting too. So we're gonna start off with actually like why is a negative or even pacing strategy like probably optimal. Like I'd say there's pretty good evidence to say it is optimal. Like all the world records are set with a negative pacing strategy, and by negative pacing strategy I mean the second half is basically faster than the first half. So if they're finishing strong, finishing the second half faster than the first, or at least even splitting it. And we see that not just in the marathon, basically in pretty much all the endurance events over 1500 meters and longer, but we're actually but there's a negative pacing strategy, or at least even, but pretty much all I think is negative pacing strategy. So Owen, why might that be optimal?
There's going to be some, I guess, physiological challenges just in general of running long distances. So especially if you go out too fast, you sort of run into these challenges earlier than the finish line of the marathon is maybe a good way to put it. Like if you pace it well, then you finish, and none of these have had too big an impact on the race that you've run. But if you go too hard too early, like the classic phrase is like hitting the wall, but you're going to run into, or these are going to potentially give you issues. So I guess if we start, we'll work through the Twitter thread. I guess we'll chuck the Twitter thread in the show notes as well. If you go out too hard, you're just using more fuel. It's the same as in a car. Like if you drive a car faster, it's using more fuel. And the makeup of that fuel, especially in the human body, is going to be slightly different. So you're going to be using more carbohydrate, a little less fat, and you don't have the carbohydrate stores to get through a marathon, especially if you're running 3 hours longer than that. You're going to have to be taking on carbohydrates through the marathon anyway. If you're going faster, it's presenting a bigger challenge already to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much everyone's familiar with the fact that you can hit the wall if you go out too hard on a marathon, and like I think most people are aware that that's because we're running out of muscle glycogen, and like there's only a finite amount that we can of carbohydrate that we can store in the muscle, and the faster we go, the more energy we're going to get from carbohydrates and the less we're going to get from fats. So that's like definitely one of the components. But actually, if you burn through your glycogen stores more quickly, and actually you deplete them, or at least nearly deplete them before you get to the end of a marathon, then you're going to have a massive drop off in the exercise intensity, because you can't fuel those higher intensities later into a marathon if you've already burnt through your muscle glycogen. And we can counteract it a bit by taking energy on. Like that seems to be important. Like taking on as much carbohydrates as you can during a marathon. I think that's definitely one for another podcast as well. Actually, I think I've already done one of them. I think that was one of my very first ones, was fueling the marathon. So we'll put that in the show notes for you to look at. So yeah, how to fuel your next marathon is already, I think that was my second one I released, but that was about 2 years ago now. So you can forgive me forgetting. But yeah, if we need to basically choose an intensity where we're going to, basically we want to use as much glycogen as we can, but we need to be able to get to the finish line first. You want to self-select an intensity where you basically completely empty your tank as you get to 26.2 miles, 42.2k. Because otherwise it's going to limit the intensity. You're going to see a massive drop off in the second half. And one of the interesting things is that actually once you're going to become a lot less efficient once you become glycogen depleted as well. So actually you'll be feeling like you're working really hard, but your the actual pace is going to decline. So actually your running economy, how much oxygen you need to run at a given pace, is going to get so much worse. Over the course of a marathon, it'll get worse anyway. But actually, if you become completely glycogen depleted, then it drops off a cliff, and you're going to be really struggling in those last few miles, which is what we see when someone completely hits the wall.
I think just another thing that you mentioned in the thread as well is if you do run out of glycogen, then it's going to really affect your recovery. And this is maybe as important for training. Like if you're chronically crashing at the end of, if you're training for a marathon at the moment, you're chronically feeling completely depleted at the end of your long run, it just affects your recovery after that as well. So apart from practicing fueling to be able to take in more carbohydrate during a race effort, it's probably worthwhile just for your recovery and for sort of running quality in the days afterwards as well. It also doesn't feel very nice, like
exactly.
So it's a really horrible feeling.
yeah 100%. Like and the research shows that actually if you completely empty your glycogen stores, but it actually takes longer to replenish them, disproportionately longer to replenish them than if you had just got them down to 50% of their starting their starting value. So actually getting completely glycogen depleted does take a lot of time to actually recover, restock those glycogen stores and be ready for another hard session. So maybe it doesn't matter so much at the end of a marathon. Like, yeah, you want to completely empty yourself, but in training, like, you probably don't want to get there because that's going to ruin your next week's training, or certainly compromise the intensity that you're going to be able to hit. So yeah, definitely worth practicing fueling the training anyway, but actually for being able to complete the high quality training for the weeks on end that you need to have a good marathon, then yeah, paying attention to your fueling is definitely really important.
So then another challenge of just exercise in general, but that specifically is going to affect sort of longer term exercise is heat dissipation. So a byproduct of metabolism itself is heat production. So the harder you work, you're going to be producing more body heat. And especially if you're exercising in warm conditions. So if you're at a warm marathon, that is going to impact. I think talking about the considerations of heat is probably its own separate complete podcast in terms of like the environmental effect. But as the event goes on, you're going to need to more cardiac output. So the amount of blood being pumped around your body is going to be required to keep yourself cool, which is one of the reasons why over the course of a long run, so a 2-hour long run, or a marathon, you're going to see some heart rate drift. So you can be running at the same effort, and your VO2 can stay level, and lactate production stays the same, but over the course of a marathon your heart rate's going to go up, and a part of that will be an increased cardiac output to help with heat dissipation, as you need to send more blood to the skin to cool. So that's going to impact. That's part of why with Dan's sort of suggestion of pacing strategies is that the heart rate that you're looking to keep or to stay below increases through the race, even though you're, ideally doing an even or slightly negative split. The heart rate is going to go up over time. And yeah, heat dissipation is a factor in that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think basically what we're trying to say is if you go out too hard, there's going to be lots of negative consequences. You're going to burn through your glycogen more quickly. You're going to increase your heat production. You're going to end up just you're not going to be able to maintain your intensity all the way to the finish line. Whereas if you actually have a slight negative pacing strategy, you maintain those glycogen stores. When actually at the end of a marathon, you can actually be hitting quite high intensities. And I put some nice heart rate data in. Well, I say it's nice. I put some of my heart rate data from my marathons where it's not gone so well in the Twitter thread, and we'll put that in the show notes. And Owain's also found a really nice paper which basically is showing the same. But actually, if you go out too hard, like your heart rate gets up really quickly, but your peak heart rate is going to happen at like probably just after halfway. So 13 miles, 15, 16, 17 miles. And then actually you can't maintain that exercise intensity anymore because you basically completely depleted your muscle glycogen, and you need carbohydrates to work at high intensity. So if you completely depleted your muscle glycogen levels, and you can't put out you can't maintain a high intensity all the way to the finish line. So actually what you see is your heart rate goes down in the latter stages of a marathon. You can't maintain the exercise intensity. Your muscles are what drive your heart rate basically. So if you can't the oxygen, if you can't metabolize, if there's no carbohydrate to metabolize, like you can't contract your muscles as much, and then actually the oxygen demand from those muscles is lower, and so your heart rate is going to drop. So basically you can't maintain your exercise intensity. So that you can be finishing the marathon with a heart rate 30 beats lower than actually your average, but you'll feel horrendous doing it because actually you've completely depleted your muscle glycogen stores. You're only still moving because you're burning fat basically, and your muscles are basically screaming out for fuel, and you're going to be very, very uneconomical. So what we want to do is not do that, maintain our exercise intensity all the way to the finish by having a nice pacing strategy. And if you pace it well, you basically see that, like Owain said, heart rate is going to drift up over the course of the marathon, but you'll see it nice and steady. And then actually, if you can really push those last 10K, you might get your heart rate almost up to max. Like, and that's what I've seen when I've paced it well, is that my max heart rate is about 188. I've just seen it in a recent 5K. I'm hitting 186, 185 at the end of a marathon, and I'm really going for it. But I couldn't, so I'm pretty much at my VO2 max, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I was completely carbohydrate depleted, glycogen depleted. I just wouldn't be able to hit those intensities. So you can actually gain time back in the second half if you've been really good at your fueling and paced it well, basically, and that's what you want to do. Shall we talk about? Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, just again, if you go out too hard as well, like muscle fiber recruitment is going to be another challenge that you're gonna run into. So again, you've talked about in this thread keeping your heart rate the entire, or at least until 30K below your threshold. So generally, if you go above that, you're going to start really recruiting a lot of type 2 muscle fibers. And for endurance exercise, they're just way less efficient. They have a higher demand of oxygen. So that's going to increase cardiac output. Your heart rate's going to keep going up. And they fatigue quicker as well. So over time and over the course of a marathon, you are probably going to recruit those fibers if you pace it right, as your type 1 muscle fibers fatigue over time. You are going to sort of recruit everything. But if you're recruiting them too early, then you sort of use those, I guess, matches is one term. And you just have a way higher oxygen cost. And as Dan was saying, your heart rate sort of peaks way too early and then drops off. Part of that, again, is going to be the recruiting those really inefficient muscle fibers. Yeah.
So I guess like the question then is actually what intensity do we need to be at for the majority of a marathon? And like we've got pretty good literature and actually just like case studies on that. From we know what the thresholds of elite athletes are. I've had athletes in the lab that I've measured, I've tested them, put them via standard physiological tests to identify thresholds for VO2 max economy, etc. And then they've gone and run a marathon. Before every marathon that I do, I like to get in the lab, see where my thresholds are, and that's pretty much predicted my marathon time, very closely, within like a minute or two, before every marathon I've done. So actually, I think at the last 6, I've pretty much got in my lab a week, 2 weeks before, seeing where my thresholds are, and that's been really predictive of what I'm going to run for a marathon. And what we typically see is that for an elite athlete, they're holding about 95-96% of their threshold pace, and by threshold I mean their LT2, their lactate turn point, the pace they could sustain for about an hour. That's the threshold I'm describing. So they're staying just below that for before the marathon, and that's what I see. I'm typically holding 95-96% of that speed during a marathon, and the reason why is because actually, if we are just below our threshold, then we're going to see a steady state in our physiology. And by that, I mean lactate levels are going to be pretty stable over time. Heart rate's going to be pretty stable. We've always said there's going to be some drift over the course of a marathon, because it's because of just fatigue and the muscle fiber recruitment, the heat buildup. But it's a quasi steady state when we're just below our threshold, but actually things are going to remain pretty stable. So if we go just above our threshold, then we're no longer going to be able to maintain a steady state. So things like our lactate are just going to drift upwards. Our oxygen consumption are going to drift upwards. We're going to start recruit more fast twitch muscle fibers. We're going to burn through glycogen much more quickly. And so that's obviously not sustainable for the over 2 hours it's going to take you to run a marathon. So that's why it seems to be really important that we need to be just below that intensity. And that's how that's a good starting point for how you should be pacing your marathon.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we'll talk through some ways of ways of identifying this. Obviously, the ideal way is to come into the lab and get tested, and then Dan will give you your heart rate that this threshold will sit at or around, within a couple of beats, and then you're good to go run a marathon. But yeah, there's some other ways of doing this as well that we'll go through.
Yeah, just a little plug for the lab testing in there, but there are ways, like you said, that you can work out actually what is a good starting point for you in terms of actually how you could use heart rate to pace yourself through a marathon. But I think the important principle is basically you need to be running the majority of your marathon at below your threshold, and if you're going out above that or at that pace, then that's when you are going to see the bigger drop off in your intensity and your pace, and a big positive split, and that you're finishing much slower than you started out at. So actually, if people have blown up massively, it's just because they've gone above their threshold too early, and they're going to be, like I said, burning through their glycogen stores, recruiting too many fast twitch muscle fibers, building up heat, all this sort of stuff, which is they're basically running at intensity that's not sustainable. And that's going to, even if you back off quite quickly, like even if you do that for, you did that for the first 10K, but realize you were going a bit fast, the damage is already done to an extent, because you've already used so much of that glycogen, which is then not going to be available at the latter part of the race. Like however much you fuel, like you're not going to be able to replace that. It's too late by then, which is why it's really important to be conservative in your approach. But if anything, like go out slightly slower than you think you can, than you think you probably can, and then that's going to allow you to finish really, really strong. Because if you get it slightly the wrong way, you get penalized pretty badly. Like a minute too fast in the first half, it could really cost you in the second, easily 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. If you, and that's just the fine margins that you have in marathon running.
I think it's worth saying as well, like this is I know it's marathon season coming up, and generally most people only have sort of one shot this autumn, but this isn't something to necessarily feel you have to get right in the first go. It takes a little bit of time. Like you need to gather some data if you're not already like wearing a heart rate strap. It's not, I'd like, hopefully people haven't got this far and think we're going to say like, oh, run at this percentage of something to run your fastest marathon. Like, it takes a bit of time. Everyone's unique. Yeah, experiment a bit, have a N of 1 experiment on yourself, and sort of build up a big data set. Like, it might not be as big as Dan's huge spreadsheet with every single time he's tested himself in the lab, but it's going to be something to sort of work on over time as well. Like, you might not get it quite right, hopefully in the direction of leaving a little bit of time on the table. That's the probably more comfortable way to not get it quite right, but it means longer term you can just make smarter sort of racing decisions and gradually improve your times.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this like how this became my approach to pacing a marathon, which we're going to go into a bit more detail about using heart rate, but how the approach came about for me was basically I had 2 shockers. I managed to sneak my way into the COVID London Marathon. It was elite only like 30 of us running, and training had gone pretty well. I think I'd probably overcooked it a bit. I'd overdone it, but anyway, I wasn't as fit as I thought I was. Went out just at the pace that I'd planned to go out, though I thought was sustainable, was a good marathon pace for me going in. I just had a horrendous time. I ended up not finishing, which it's my only marathon DNF, and it was particularly embarrassing because it was the elite only race, and I'd managed to sneak my way in, and I didn't even finish. I was just having a bad day, but I was wearing a heart rate strap for that, and I'm obviously a slow learner because I did London Marathon the next year, and I think this time I'm getting my excuses in, but I think I had a virus going into this one because, again, training had gone really well. I was really fit, and then I was just on the day, my heart rate was so much higher than I thought it normally would be for the pace, and I thought, oh, maybe it's just nerves, caffeine, whatever. So I just chose to ignore it, which ended up in me having a massive positive split. I ended up running like I was 2:28, 2:29 or something, and I was, beforehand, I was thinking I'm in 2:15 shape here at least. I'm definitely well under 2:20 shape. But I didn't go off. I went off fast, but not crazy fast. Like I think I was, I basically blew up. So look back, I basically was determined then after that race, I'm not going to do this again. I went back, looked at my heart rate data, and go, well, I know my threshold heart rate is 170. I've been testing my lab loads. If I do a half marathon, I average about 170. And I was hitting like 170 after 6 miles, 7 miles, something like that. Let's have a look. I've got it here on my Twitter thread. I've got up. Where did I hit it? It was far too early anyway. And I had the classic after about 7 miles. So for our metric people, it's about 11, 12K. And obviously, like, that's not sustainable. I'm hitting my threshold at that point. Then, like I said, I've burning through my glycogen far too quickly. You can see my heart rate trace in the Twitter thread we're going to share. Have that typical peaking at Our heart rate is getting up to 170, and I maintain that for a bit, and then just can't maintain that intensity anymore. Heart rate drops off, and again, I had a big positive split. So anyway, I was determined not to do that again, and so decided to take try to come up with a plan to make sure that I basically didn't go off too hard. And I think we just go through my worked example of how I go about it, basically. Do you think, or do you want to talk about identifying the threshold heart rate first? Maybe we should do that first.
Yeah, again, like I said, obviously the best way is come in the lab and do it. It's going to be a lot more accurate, but if you just have a heart rate strap, I mean, like maybe also say this works if you wear a chest heart rate strap. We say like the separate arm optical ones are not bad, but watch heart rate is probably going to be rubbish.
If you're using any heart rate for anything, I would say is probably don't trust the one just coming from your wrist. So the optical heart rate built into the watch, like, that can be pretty dubious and can lock onto cadence, and like sometimes it'll give a nice trace if the strap's really tight, but if not, like, it's a bit rubbish. The optical ones on your arm, I've had a good experience of them. They seem to be fine. There's a bit of a delay sometimes in terms of actually, if you're doing an interval session, like, the heart rate takes a little bit of time to rise up compared to if you were wearing a chest strap. But I think for the purpose of a marathon, it's probably fine. But yeah, gold standard is, well, for actually training, it's if you're not going to go around with an ECG on, but you can wear one of the chest straps, which is basically the same thing. So yeah, let's get that caveat away. We're talking about if you're using heart rate, chest strap is way to go, really. Sorry, I interrupted you there, but you can go on.
No, yeah. So yeah, make sure the data going into this experiment of one is good. If you're putting rubbish data in, it's probably not going to work out. Yeah, in terms of figuring out your threshold heart rate, like we always talk about, like, pace you can run for an hour. For a lot of people, especially in the UK, there's going to be a lot of half marathons and maybe a few 10-mile races about in the next few weeks, and then especially over the winter. Those are both good, like really good opportunities for determining sort of at least a ballpark for this heart rate. It's not going to be quite as accurate as coming into the lab, especially depending on how you race the race itself, but the average heart rate is probably going to be close. I know when I've run good half marathons, my average heart rate is bang on what I've found in the lab. And that's, I'm not looking at my heart rate during those races. I'm just running for 75 minutes as hard as I can. And it comes out pretty accurate. I know we were talking about this earlier, and Dan was saying his is maybe 1 or 2 beats higher, but that's pretty good. That's a pretty good estimation.
I think a race that's going to take you about an hour, a half marathon, 10-mile race, that sort of distance. If you're a 90-minute half marathon runner, then maybe actually it's going to underestimate what you can do, because you're going to be running a little bit below your threshold for a fair chunk of that race. But yeah, taking the average, it might be a couple of beats off, but it's not going to be 20 beats off, for example. It gets you a pretty good ballpark where your heart rate was going to be. Yeah, I think often depends a little bit on the things like the conditions of the heat that can affect your heart rate and stuff like that. But yeah, Owen said, I think normally my threshold pretty much always comes out when I test in the lab at about 170. I think I did a leg of the Castles relays, for those who know that race, which is I think my leg was about 20k, and took me straight up a mountain, mind. It took me an hour and 8 minutes, and my heart rate average for that was 172. So it's pretty close. And I think that's a good starting point for if you can't get into the lab. Like, it's definitely better than guessing or using a percentage of your max, because knowing what your max is, like, that's, you need to go and actually, you can't use a 220 minus your age or anything. That's a load of rubbish. You've got to go, if you want to know what your max is, go and run a 5k, push it as hard as you can, and see what your max heart rate is at the end of that. And by saying do a 5k, I mean do a 5k race, because you need the motivation to really push it as hard as you can. That's going to give you your max heart rate. It's going to be ballpark 85%, 87% of your max heart rate. That's a good, if you're not going to go and do a half marathon race, like, I would say that's a good percentage, but I would be much more confident in getting an average data from a race, because like the percentage for people where their threshold heart rate is pretty variable. I think like mine is about 90%, but I've seen people down to 80%, or people at 93%. So like that's quite a big range. But yeah, the average intensity, the average heart rate from a half marathon or race that's going to take you around about an hour is going to be pretty close.
And I'd say as well, just in terms of the max heart rate, like, I just know from experience that you can run a really hard race, like cross country, like you can run a cross country where the final like 200 meters is up a hill, and you're really going for it, and that should get you close to your max heart rate. And I've seen it where it's still sort of 4 or 5 beats below what I've seen in the lab, like during a VO2 max test. So like, yeah, max heart rate is a number, and there'll be calculators out there that will try give you your thresholds off of that. But yeah, like Dan said, that sort of half marathon 10-mile effort is going to be a lot more accurate, I think, especially for this purpose, where you definitely don't want to be near that max heart rate.
Yeah, if you get near your max heart rate early into the marathon, things are going bad. You don't need any of us to tell you that. You're gonna know. You're gonna feel that that's too hard. But yeah, I think so. Right, you found out your max heart rate. You found out your max heart. You found out what you got a good estimate of your average heart rate. So you might be able to go back into historical data, and you can see it then. And actually, if you've got heart rate data from a marathon you've done previously, go and have a look at what your trace was like there. Like if you paced it well, then that's going to give you a pretty good idea of like the heart rate that you want to match during your next marathon. But actually, if you paced it, if you knew you blew up at the end, see what heart rate you were getting it to at halfway, see if that really dropped off in the latter half, then actually you know that you can't replicate that. You need to be a bit below what you did last time. So that's a nice starting point for you too. But yeah, say we'll use my data as an example because I've practiced this many times. But I've worked out my heart rate is 170. I know I can't hit that too early. And actually, what I've found from experience is that I need to set like intermediate heart rate like limits. So basically, for every 5 miles, I know that I don't want to go above X heart rate, because you're going to still have drift, even though it's a steady state. When you're below your threshold, it's a quasi steady state. Like you are still going to see drift for all the things that we talked about earlier. Like, as you get glycogen depleted, your economy is going to get worse. And so you're going to need more oxygen to run at a given pace. So that's going to lead to an increase in heart rate. You're going to build up heat and you're going to get dehydrated. So actually, as you get hotter, then more blood is going to go to the skin. And so that's going to help with the cooling. And as you get dehydrated, you're going to reduce your cardiac output. So you're going to need to pump your heart more frequently to produce the same amount of oxygen flow to your muscles. So you are going to see drift, and you need to account for that in your pacing. So for me, I want to average. I want to stay below 161 heart rate for up to 5 miles. Once you go past 5 miles, I don't mind it going up to 163, up to 10 miles. By 15 miles, I don't mind it getting up to 165. 20 miles, I'm about 170. So I'm going to get to my threshold heart rate, but it's just making sure I get there at 20 miles and not 6 miles. And actually, once you get to 20 miles, it's pretty much run as hard as you can to a finish. Obviously, you're not going to suddenly take off and run that next mile as fast as you can. But from experience, then you're just doing everything you can to maintain and maybe slightly increase your pace in the last 10K and just maximize what you can do. From then on, I'm not really looking at my heart rate. It's very much just actually manage your efforts to a finish line, get to a finish line, and squeeze out everything you can. But I can only do that if I've set myself up well by not going out too hard in the first part of the race. And obviously, those example heart rates you gave, they're specific for me, and I found that works for me. Like in the last 6 marathons that I've done, that's how I've done my pacing strategy. Is basing it off of heart rate and making sure that I manage. Actually, no, I'm not looking at external things like pace. I am a little bit, but actually, I'm not using the pace to target the intensity I'm running at. I'm using my heart rate, my perception of effort, because now I know what I should be feeling like at 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles into a marathon. I'm very much using that to guide my pacing strategy.
I think you could probably also look at implementing or testing that before the marathon. Assuming you're doing some amount of marathon specific sessions in your training, there, I don't know, like thinking off the top of my head, like if you're doing like 3 by 5K at marathon pace, I'm saying that in quotation marks because you don't know marathon pace until you've run it, but you probably, at least for the first 2, you're probably not going to want your heart rate above, like if we're using Dan's example, 161. Like if it's getting above that in those first, like if you're in a training session, so you don't have the sort of adrenaline of the race, and you've got a recovery between those sort of 5K reps, so you've run 6 miles of the first 2 reps in at your marathon pace. If it's going above that heart rate that you've identified for that first part of the race, that's probably a sign that either you're going too fast or maybe the heart rates need to be slightly adjusted. But especially if your heart rate's up at your threshold in those, if you do that 3 by 5K session, that's maybe a sign that you need to back the pace off a little bit or back your pace goal off. Obviously, that's not ideal. You don't want to be like 3 weeks out from a marathon and thinking, oh, I maybe need to back off here. Like ideally you're getting to that point and you're thinking like, oh yeah, like feeling really fit, can maybe, maybe even think of a, slightly faster goal. But like we said, this is about your N of 1 experiment. And and applying some physiology to your training, and especially training that's maybe traditionally always been, you know, like pace and like, you know, V dot, using a V dot chart to say like, oh, I've run this for 5K, what can I run for a marathon? What should I run these reps at? And actually you can bring in heart rate to hopefully improve your performance.
Yeah, and like I said, with that example session, like I think another indicator that maybe that's either too fast is that you're seeing this big drift over the course of that session. So maybe in the first 5K you're getting up to 160, the second one you're at 165, and the third one you're at 170. Well, that's probably too much drift over the course of just 15K of running. Like, because if you're seeing like over 15K, then over 42K you're going to see that's obviously not going to be sustainable. I think one thing to say is that actually in the first 4 or 5K, like heart rate it does take a bit of time to reach a sort of stable state. So I've just pulled up my data now from let's look at Valencia where I set my PB. So this is in miles. So basically the average heart rate for the first few miles. So I go 150 for the first mile average, 159, 159, 161. And then actually I'll just go through the first few just to give you an idea. But there's obviously going to be, that first mile is obviously going to be quite a few beats lower than the rest, because it just takes time for your heart rate to jump up to the right intensity. But yeah, 150, 159, 159, 161, 163, 162, 162, 162, 162, 164, 162, 163, 162, 164. This is up to 14 miles now. So you see that actually the first 14 miles, they're all within a couple of beats of each other. So I'm really nice and stable at that intensity. So actually where you do start to see drift tends to be later in that race. So if you go back to what my splits were, it was 161 for my heart rate targets for the first 5 miles, it's 161. For 10 miles, I only want to go up to 163. 15 miles was 165. So there it's 2 beats each 5 miles. But then for 170, I'm expecting about at 20 miles, I'm expecting a 5 beat drift. And then over the last 10K, you're going to see quite a big drift in your heart rate. But then doesn't matter so much. So the drift is going to come more in the latter half of the race. So you need to make sure that you've got plenty of reserve there to accommodate for that. But yeah, as I said, heart rate should be reasonably stable for the first 15 miles really. And like where mine starts to really drift is from 20 miles onwards, then it starts to go up much more quickly. So if I'm looking at, although like you see from those examples I gave there, I'm about 162, 163 average for the first half, but actually by the end I'm up 171, 173, 178. So actually things are really getting quite hard now. But if you're when you're looking for a sustainable marathon heart rate, that's what you should see. If you're doing like a marathon pace training run, your heart rate should be really quite stable for the majority of it. Well, actually for all of it probably, because you're not going to be doing 20 miles at marathon pace, I expect. Like I think like that's probably a bit hard from my own experience. Maybe up to a half marathon in training you could do at marathon pace. I think personally for me, I find it too hard to do anything longer than that, and I prefer to actually go if I'm going to do a long run, I'd first go a long run a bit slower than marathon pace rather than try and do a long run at marathon pace personally.
Yeah, just on that example as well, like I just found a session where I did 4x5K, and I was running this on the treadmill, so I know the pacing is at least accurate, so there's not going to be jumps, and I did increase the speed for each of the 5Ks a little bit, but yeah, like there's a drift of 3 beats across the first 3 reps, and then on the fourth 5K rep I sort of let the reins off a bit in that session, but even then it's only like 6 beats for 20K, and the pace is increasing. So I think I went from 16.5 to 17 kilometers an hour on the treadmill. So what's that? It's 340 or 338 down to like 330 per K. So I've gone quicker. My heart rate's only gone up like 6 beats across the session. Whereas if I was running that way too hard, that's going to be like, that's just going to keep going up the whole session, and then it would be over your threshold and you'd be blowing up sort of by the end. So yeah, like Dan was saying, in your sessions, like this is somewhere to experiment as well, and and yeah, maybe come up with the plan and then put it to practice in a session and just see if it holds up there. And if not, do a bit more tinkering.
Yeah, and 100%, like, it's very much a trial and error method. Like, because I've worn a heart rate strap for, well, the last 10 marathons, it must be something like that now. And actually, even now, I'm going, okay, right. Every time, it's just another data point that I know, like, in terms of refining the heart rate pattern I want to see across the marathon. And actually, now I've got a really good idea of the heart rate I can sustain. So actually, when I'm doing my training sessions now, when I really want to target marathon intensity and get an idea of what I can run, if I'm doing one session I often do is 4x4 miles with 1 mile steady, so it ends up 20 miles with 16 miles at marathon pace. And if I'm averaging pretty much my marathon heart rate for that, then I go, okay, well, I can probably run that, I can probably finish that off and I can run that intensity of 4 miles for the marathon. And that just helps with the pacing. At least, like, I always go in and try and ignore the pace and go off the heart rate now and my perception of effort, and just like whatever your fitness is on the day, that's what it is. Just go off of that. Actually, just trying to focus on pacing it well, listening to your body, because I am not just blindly going off of heart rate. I am listening and going, actually, does this feel sustainable? Because I think heart rate is great, and for me it works really well, but things like the heat, like your nerves, how much caffeine you've taken before, all these little things can make small differences. So it's still, like, never just forget about RPE. And I've had it where actually the heart rate monitor just decided today it's not going to work. It's not going to work today. So you're running if you've just not got any heart rate and you've based your whole method on that and you're running blind, that can be a bit scary. So I think always learning to actually listen to how you're feeling. And I think now, to be honest, I could probably take off the heart rate and just go off a feel, because I've run so many marathons and I'm calibrated now to know actually what should I feel like at each stage of a marathon. And actually what I could probably tell you what my heart rate is to a couple of beats, because I'm a massive nerd and I've always got a heart rate strap on. But yeah, I'm very much using that. And I think it's quite fun. As a side note, just saying, to going off of heart rate and going off of RP, people always ask me at the start of a race, oh, so what's your plan then? What are you going to go through halfway in? And they always think I'm being a bit coy or a bit like just don't want to share, because I say, oh, I don't know, like, because I literally don't know what I'm going to get. I'm running through halfway in until I get to halfway. But because I've done this so many times now, I know if I'm going to be on for a good day or not. By 5 miles, by 10k, I know if this is going to be a good day or a bad day based upon actually what pace am I running, what's my heart rate doing. If I'm running 3:12 k's, 5:10 a mile, and my heart rate's looking great, I know today is going to be a good day. And which is what I ran at Valencia, and I got a PB. But I knew that I was on for a PB. At least by halfway, I was like, well, I'm very confident now that I can sustain this to the finish, which I did. And actually now I have a lot more confidence going into a marathon, because I think a lot of the nerves around a marathon is actually, am I going to execute this on my day? And now I know basically I am going to execute it on my day, because I know how to pace a marathon. My next one may be awful, right? It might be shocking. There's always things that can go wrong. You can get GI distress, you can get injuries, niggles, stitches, or whatever. But I probably jinxed myself now. But I'm 99% confident going to that marathon. But yeah, of course I'm nervous, but I know how to pace this, and I know that actually whatever fitness I've got on the day, I'm gonna be able to maximize that, because sometimes it's just not your day. You don't feel great, and you don't run as fast as you think you were, and actually you felt better in a training session 2 weeks ago. But actually being able to at least knowing that I can squeeze everything out of my body today, whatever it's got, like that's removed a lot of the stress around a marathon for me. And I think just it makes it a much more enjoyable experience as well.
Yeah, I think the whole idea about this is like it's not guaranteed to work, especially the first time, in terms of, like we keep banging on about, you need more data and a bit of trial and error. But you do have to sort of you have to, I guess, understand that you can't like kid physiology. Like you can't, in the same way you can't, like break the laws of physics. You can't, I don't know if there's laws of physiology, but there is. I mean, if you go over your threshold in a marathon, you're not gonna get to the finish at that speed. Like you can't.
Yeah.
You can talk all you want about like rolling the dice or whatever, but if you run too hard, then you're gonna blow up. So, you can't kid physiology, but there is a way to sort of pragmatically do it, like you say. And like, yeah, you might find that you go out too conservatively in it, and it's really, really difficult to stand on a start line and run your own race. And there's, there might be someone that you train with. You might, if you're on London Marathon on the champ start line and you know a bunch of people around you, and you might, know from previous races in the build up that you're faster than people, and you might see them disappearing off into the distance, but you just have to have like a bit of trust and
the
belief
marathon,
in this as well.
Yeah, the marathon really, really rewards you for running a smart race, not getting carried away, and being really, and like you said, you can't cheat your physiology. Like that's going to, you can't, like you can want it as much as you want. You can roll the dice, say, oh, I'm just going to take a risk and go through it. But actually, if you've gone out too hard, it's just not gonna. You're not gonna. You can't. You're gonna really pay for it. I mean, I give the example of someone who wants to run 3 hours. I've got a PB of 3:10 for a marathon. Training's gone really well. They want to go sub 3, 2:59:59. That's the goal. So they go out at that pace. Get on the back of the pacemaker, and heart rate's got up. Your heart rate's got up to threshold too quickly. You probably know, you can probably feel that you're working a bit too hard, but you go, no, I'm just going to stick at it because it might be my day. I might be able to hang on. But inevitably, the wheels fall off and you end up running 3:15. Actually, if you're just, and that's a bad experience that's going to be a horrendous experience. You're going to feel horrible during the race. It's going to take you forever to recover. All that training is going to feel like it's been wasted, because actually, if you'd paced it better, you might have run 3:03, which wasn't sub 3. But it'd been a massive PB. You'd have finished it really strong. You would have actually, in hindsight, go, oh yeah, that's all I had on the day. I had a great experience. I've knocked off a bit of time off my PB. Next time, hopefully, I'll be a little bit fitter. I'll go sub 3. Whereas I think just chasing for arbitrary, because they are effectively arbitrary, these times what people are chasing for. And actually, you can say, all right, oh okay, I think I'm in 2:16 shape based on on my training, but you don't know you're in 2:16 shape until you get to 20 miles of them, or until you're getting a good chunk into a marathon, and if you're working too hard or not. Like you're going to find out. It's very much going to be. It's always a guess, which is why I go into a marathon now thinking, right, I'm more thinking about, I'm in science we talk about confidence intervals, and like if you have a 95% confidence interval is what we often talk about. So I'm 95% certain I could run within this window. So and that's going to be a window of a couple of minutes. I'm not going to know if I'm in PB shape until I've started the race and got a good chunk into it. So just trying to come up with a time that you think, oh yeah, I'm in this shape, and just hanging on for that for dear life is probably suboptimal. Sometimes you get lucky and you'll have just, your guess is perfect, but I'd say most of the time it's not. And that's when we see people blowing up. And actually I would so much prefer someone to go a little bit conservative, hold back a minute, because actually just giving up a minute isn't going to make a big difference in terms of finishing time, but might actually be the difference between going out too hard and not going out too hard, and been slowing massively in the second half. I do think, you can outperform a lot of people just by running a smart race. And I feel like that's something that I've done. I think I like the marathon because it's not just it's a challenge of fitness and training, obviously, but it's also actually running a smart race and really executing well, and actually being switched on, paying attention to your fueling. Really, there's things that are very much in your control, which can allow you to outperform someone who might be fitter on the day, but just can't execute well. Which I think is nice about the marathon. I feel like it's very much, you get very much, the marathon is awful if it goes well, but great if it goes right, which is why I like it.
So I think to sum up, it's fairly straightforward, isn't it? I mean, like we said at the start, ideally go in and get tested with Dan. But if you're not going to do that, if you're not already, start collecting some heart rate data. Even if you don't use it right now, even if you're listening to this and you're like not running marathons and you're not you don't want to start playing around with your heart rate and looking at that, just getting the data is really useful. Just having years worth of heart rate data is, at some point you'll thank yourself for doing it.
Yeah, 100%. I think I started wearing it during my masters, a heart rate strap. And now I've literally I've worn a heart rate data of about 99.9% of my runs for the last 5 or 6 years now. And I really, like, looking back at my first marathons I did, I really wish I had that data now to go, what was going on there. So I think it does reward you for the more data you've got, like the more helpful it becomes. And I would say actually in your first, going into your next marathon, actually don't set yourself heart rate targets, because you don't know what you can what your intermediate split should be. But just have an idea of what your threshold is. Make sure you are not getting there too early, and actually just pay attention to not the external splits, but how you're feeling, what's your heart rate doing, and actually just run it like that. And then actually once you've done that, hopefully that goes well. And if it does, you can look at that heart rate trace and go, right, that I paced that brilliantly. I'm just going to replicate that next time. Or if it doesn't go quite so well, maybe you blew up really badly, then actually maybe you need to be a bit more conservative on those heart rates and go, right, next time I've got a bit of a better guide. Or maybe it's just more subtle. You go, I just fell off a little bit in the last 10K. So maybe just dial everything back a couple of beats and I'll have nailed that. And that's just how you refine it over time. So it's very much like Owain was saying, like the more data points you've got, the more informed you're going to be. And then actually collecting heart rate across different races as well, I think is really helpful for just actually coming up with your own sort of heart rate zones, and knowing what sort of intensity you can sustain for different distances is really, really interesting. And from my experience, it's really repeatable. And but I always average 165, 166 for a marathon. For a 10K, for a half marathon, I'm always about 171, 172. For a 10K, I'm always about 176, 177. A bit more variability in a 5K, I find. I don't know if it's just pacing or what, but actually across a lot of differences, I've got a lot of distances, I'm very consistent in what I average. And sometimes it's going to be a motivation factor. Sometimes you have an extreme environmental condition, so it's like it's 35 degrees today. Like that's going to elevate your heart rate probably more, even though the pace is going to be slower. But assuming a reasonably normal conditions, like for me at least, and maybe not exactly the same for everyone, but for me, heart rate seems to be really replicable, and it's been a great tool.
100%. So yeah, if you don't already, buy a heart rate strap.
Yeah, buy a heart rate strap, really good investment. They're all just as good as each other pretty much these days. Well, I would go Garmin or Polar.
Yeah, I've had bad experience with Wahoo.
I was gonna say Wahoo, yeah, don't get a Wahoo, but like Polar or Garmin, you're not going to go far wrong. You don't need one which tells you about your running power or your ground contact times or any of this. Just like if you get a Polar H9, Polar H10, like they're like between 50 and 70 quid. I think the Garmin is pretty similar. Go with one of them, and that'd be a really good investment. I think one more thing I'm going to add before we wrap up, so I think we're nearly there. A little hack to stop you just staring at your heart rate on your watch the whole time is to have it so when you're running your marathon and you've got your heart, you can certainly on Garmin you can have it so that it displays your average heart rate for the last lap. So actually I've got to mile 1, my watch beeps, right? It can report my average heart rate there, so it will say, okay, heart rate was 150 average, right? Great, okay. But if I miss that, I can always have it on my watch, so it says actually what was the average heart rate of my last lap, and it comes up like 150. So actually I'm not looking at my heart rate every single minute of the marathon, because that would drive you mad. Mental fatigue and overload, just too much data. Even for someone like me has too much data. So I just had it be, so if I get feedback every mile, so 26 times over a marathon, or 42 times if you're in Ks, then actually that's a much more manageable input. And I just go, okay, every mile I go, right, what was the average heart rate? Yeah, perfect, great, keep going up that intensity. Or if it's just a bit high, I go, all right, need to back off slightly. Or sometimes I'm like, well, actually I can speed up a little bit here, I can push it a little bit more. I think I'm a bit more cautious about picking up the intensity because of all the consequences of going out too hard. But sometimes that have happened. I felt like I'm working quite hard here, but my heart rate is actually a couple of beats lower than I think I can normally sustain. And now I've got so much confidence in it, but I'm more inclined to push it on, compared to maybe when I was first using this method, and I would prefer to play it a little bit safe. But yeah, I think that's just a nice like practical tip which can be quite helpful instead of just spending over 2 hours staring at your watch.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, like most big marathons now will have mile markers every mile, or kilometer markers if you're in a European race. I know, I think London has mile and kilometer.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But at least have every 5k and every mile. So like even if you don't want to set the laps up, you can still manually lap every mile or every kilometer. So yeah, plenty of ways to do it, to not just be staring at your watch as well.
Yeah. Cool. So hopefully that is helpful. Basically, wrap it up. Don't go out too hard. Don't pace it like a moron. You'll regret it. Don't go chasing times. Listen to your body. Look at your heart rate. Use all the data you can to help execute it well. It's much more fun to run a marathon that way. Finishing a marathon, like I nearly like the last 10k of a marathon if I'm really going some, because if you paced it well, you're flying past people who have gone out too hard and held on, and if you know them as well, it's even better when you just see them reeling them in, and you know that they're having a horrendous day, so you feel a bit bad for them, but at the same time you're like, that just spurs you on a bit more. Like and pacing a marathon, the opposite. Pacing a marathon badly is just the worst experience for all we've said already. Like, it hurts like hell. Recovery time is so much longer. All that training seems wasted. You're battered for weeks afterwards. It's just not a fun experience. So I think really getting that pacing right, using heart rate is a great tool. Don't forget about RPE, or perception of effort, because that's actually, if you're an experienced marathon runner, you should know what sort of effort should feel like. But even then, I like the heart rate as well to back up those sensations. Let's wrap up. I think Owain's got a little plug to do if I'm right.
Yeah, I'm taking over the plug this week. This is mostly for people Cardiff, South Wales area. If you want to come from further afield, then I really appreciate that. But I've started recruiting for my dissertation study. I think we'll probably end up doing a podcast on this. I talk about it enough anyway. We can probably get an hour's worth out of it. But I'm looking at the EPO response from a single bath or hot water immersion. It's a sort of growing area of research using hot water immersion to increase blood volume or hemoglobin mass. Traditionally, people one of the reasons you might go to altitude is to increase the amount of blood volume or hemoglobin mass you have. But I've tried to keep it brief. There's a number of issues with potentially going to altitude, and this is where hot water immersion sort of emerging as an alternative and more accessible sort of stimulus. Like I said, I'm basically going to be getting people to have a bath, and then I'm going to be taking a number of blood samples across different time points. So straight off the bat, if you're afraid of needles, it's probably not a study for you. Across the whole study, there's going to be 10 blood samples. If you're someone that faints when you get an injection or have to give blood samples, it's probably not one for you. So we're looking for 18 to 40-year-olds, saying endurance training 5 or more times a week. No existing sort of cardiovascular, respiratory, nervous system or metabolic diseases. You'll be either doing a hot bath or a control, and then blood samples at before and after 6, 12 and 24 hours. So there is a bit of a time commitment. It's probably going to suit people that work from home or students that are able to make it to our campus in Cardiff. Especially the 12 and the 24 the 6 and the 12 hour time points are probably the tough ones. We're thinking like bath first thing in the morning, and then you'll have to be coming back around midday, late lunch sort of thing, and then back in the evening.
Or you can just hang around on campus, do some work, hang out with us.
There's places to work.
We'll a chat with you about sports science and sport physiology.
A 12-hour podcast live recording.
But you can they can carry on with their day as normal, basically, as long as you don't train, right? Yeah. And it's
So
male and
no
female,
training during the day.
yeah.
There's a few other standardizations, like no big sessions the day before, no getting like absolutely obliterated in central Cardiff the night before, sort of thing.
Or
Staying off the
during
beers.
or after the bath either. Like,
Yeah.
don't go out and get pissed. Yeah.
But yeah, if you're interested, we are offering free VO2 max and lactate testing for taking part, just because we're asking quite a lot of participants. So that will be most likely with me. It might be with Dan as well. But yeah, so you'll get some really good physiological data if you are willing to take part. I will chuck a link in the show notes and on my Twitter to the study if you're interested. If you're at all interested, please get in touch. Happy to talk through the study with you and jump on a call or something. Hopefully anyone listening is interested, or if you know someone that lives nearby that you think might be interested, by all means send the info on to them as well.
Nice. Yeah. It'd be cool to be involved in some basically some research is basically asking, can we use heat instead of altitude? And like, spoiler, we think we probably can, which is hence why we're doing the study. Or Owain's doing the study. We definitely could do a podcast on that at the minute, because quite a bit of research starting to come out now, looking really promising, and it's really, really interesting, really exciting, opening up the possibility of the benefits of altitude without going to altitude. I think it's quite an exciting topic. I guess one more thing for me to say is thank you for everybody who emailed me about coaching. I was expecting, I said a limit of 5 people I was going to take on. Well, I thought that might take me up until the 1st of September. Well, I got 5 within about 24 hours of putting out the podcast, and I've been inundated. So please stop applying now. You can still email me, and I will I'll put you on a waiting list. But unfortunately, I'd love to coach all of you, but I just there were fantastic applications as well. I was expecting there might be a few people who actually really obviously want to improve, but could probably quite easily get better from just actually minimal input from a coach, by just doing a little bit more running. But actually some really exciting people I'm looking forward to working with, and everybody was I feel very privileged that you think that I can that you'd like me to coach you. So thank you for everyone who sent them in. If I haven't emailed you back, I am working on it over the next few days. As I said, there's quite a few to get through, but I've started contacting people about whether I'm in a position to take you on or not. And actually, even if I can't take you on now, like I need to find out how many people I honestly think I can take on and still do a really good job, because I want to offer a high quality service. I don't want to take you on, just take your money and actually not give you the attention and the detail that you deserve. So actually, once I find out what works with fitting in around my job working at the Sport Physiology Hub and raising a kid and doing a bit of running myself, I might be able to take on a few more. So we're going to see how it goes. But thank you very much for sending all your emails over to me. So cool, that's us signing off now. It took a bit longer than I thought to get through that. I thought that might be a quicker podcast, but hopefully we didn't rattle on too much. As always, let us know what you thought. Sending us feedback, send us topics you think you might be interested in. I think we're going to do a bit more on preparing for the marathon over the next couple of episodes, because it's that time of season and we both love the marathon distance. But thanks for listening.
I'd say feedback appreciated, especially in interesting places. I got some on the top of a fell race the other day from some local runners about the podcast. So shout at us if you see us out running. Or
I'm doing Cardiff 10k on Sunday, so I might not be the most receptive at 9k into that, but if you want to shout at me, then please do so. But no, thanks for all the support and the listens. We will record another episode for you soon. Take care.